Wheatley, and welcome to episode 197 of the Weekly podcast. Thank you very much for joining us wherever you are doing so. Thanks for listening to my episode last week. It was a follow-on from episode 189, where for the 41 years that I've been alive, I picked my favorite song from each year. And then last week I decided, for some unknown reason really, to rank all those 41 songs to kind of clear it all up. It gets a bit of OCD, I suppose, would probably be involved there. So if you haven't listened to that and you're interested, go back and have a listen. You can support us on Buy Me a Coffee. Link is in the description. Very excited about today's guest. He's a journalist and the author of Everybody Loves Our Town, A History of Grunge. And his name is Mark Yarm. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing right, Derek. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. I just want to say, I was going to say it beforehand, but then I thought I better do it when I'm on video. I did a silly endurance course event yesterday. So if I'm shifting around in my seat because of cramp or anything else that might come up, ignore it, carry on as normal, Mark. We'll get through it together. That's basically what
I will keep that in mind.
Okay.
Around.
Mark, we always start at the beginning. Can you give us a history of your upbringing, please?
Sure. Wow, I grew up in Milford, Connecticut, which is not too far from New Haven, where Yale University is. I was born at Yale University Hospital. Probably shouldn't say that because that's probably a password clue somewhere. But and for the first 20 odd years I lived there, and then my parents moved to somewhere in New York, Westchester, New York. I mean, I ultimately went to school in Waltham, Massachusetts, and I ended up coming back to not coming back to the city. I ended up getting a job in the city, and I've been in the city, either Brooklyn or Manhattan, ever since.
Very nice.
That's a real sketch. I don't know if you have any more particular questions, but that's the overall arc of my life right now.
No, that's absolutely perfect. It's all about, what the person wants to divulge and the stuff, and it just gives us a little bit of a kind of a map into where we're going to go with the chat, and then obviously what you got into.
Sure.
Another question that we always ask, Mark, and it's kind of it's something that I was kind of pulled up on a couple of weeks ago when I suggested that the Americans are ahead of the Irish, and I think I was talking to an English person at the time with regards to talking about mental health. But the question is always, when did you first become aware of mental health?
Probably in my 20s. Because I suffer from depression, so that was I probably had some episodes of that before, but I didn't recognize them for what they were. And then in my 20s was when I finally started going to therapy. So I live in New York, so that's like super, and obviously it's pretty garden variety depression, but it has been quite bad at some points in my life, but right now it's quite under control with medication and therapy, and I'm feeling good. So I've definitely like in your 20s, all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, maybe things aren't maybe things are askew somehow, and other people feel this way too. Like you just kind of come into your own and realize that life can be difficult. I mean, not that wasn't clear earlier on probably, but it's just like when you start feeling like depression or things of that nature in your 20s, I think it really hits you very hard.
It's so, the answers vary so widely in this question, and it's just of interest. And I think my point at the time was that the Americans talked about therapy an awful lot more, or they were definitely availed of therapy a lot more, whereas I can only speak for the Irish, but the idea of therapy when I was quite young was, so far fetched that somebody had to be almost too far gone at that stage for them to actually go. Wow. Yeah, okay. It's definitely, and I remember, when I was started really getting into films and I started hearing about the idea of analysts and therapists, and I was thinking, do all Americans go to therapy? And obviously, very naively,
they do not.
They do not. But, and but now obviously I have for a long time. I've been, going to therapy since I was 20, 26 or something like that. And I can obviously appreciate the value of it, the whole necessity for me, certainly. But
Right.
it's that whole thing of like, you don't have to be at the very bottom of how you could possibly feel with depression wise or anxiety wise to go. It's there for a lot of things, I suppose.
What's there? I'm sorry.
Sorry, therapy in general. It's there for,
Oh
you can
yeah,
use it
yeah,
for a lot
yeah,
of
yeah.
different things,
Of course, of course, yeah. I mean, as I said, live in Brooklyn, New York, so it's pretty. I mean, it's like as common as, I mean, it's as, common as can get
Yeah.
around here. People being in therapy for sure. So yeah, I mean, obviously, well, good for you. I'm glad you're taking care of yourself, especially if the culture doesn't tend to encourage it. But yeah, I think it's like nothing to be, something to
Mhm.
be, nothing to be ashamed of, clearly. And being on meds or whatever, Zoloft, there's no shame in that either. So as long as they, can keep you at a nice level. So
Yeah.
um yeah, but so it's pretty, my mental health journey is pretty garden variety depression stuff. So
That's fair enough. And thank you very much for sharing it, by the way.
oh, of
So
course.
I wanted to talk about, well, I want to talk about a lot of things, but with regards to music, what were you drawn to as a kid, music wise?
In high school, I think I kind of was drawn to U2 and REM and Prince, and those were sort of more entryway bands to like, um, you know, what ultimately, like, I mean, obviously I've written about grunge,
Hmm.
like those were entryways to like sort of what we called back then college rock, which was, anything that would be played on a college rock radio station, with, a little bit skewed, but obviously listening back now, it doesn't sound so strange. But um so yeah, I mean, that kind of led to an interest in like, like what we call alternative rock or
Hmm.
indie rock, and reading Spin magazine, and then like kind of getting in college, like sort of caught up in the grunge soap opera, Courtney, and Pearl Jam, and just the whole, there were some really larger than life characters, which is one of the things that drew me to writing about it as well.
That's what I found. Like, obviously, I found many things great about the book, but like I mentioned before, I grew up with grunge, and I will tell you this, Mark. The only cool thing about me is the first CD I ever bought. I was 10 years of age, and I bought Nevermind,
Okay,
and that is the only cool thing I can categorically state that that's
that's
it.
the
But
only cool thing. Wow,
yes,
you got
but it's a pretty cool
okay,
thing. It's not bad,
yeah.
like, But um, I I always I'm fascinated by this idea of what grunge is. Now, some people listening to this podcast won't even maybe be aware of the term. Is it a kind of is it a genre of music, or do you think it's more of a culture, or what was it at the time?
I mean, it was a genre of music. I mean,
Hmm.
a lot of people would argue that it was a marketing term. In some ways it was, but it's a very effective marketing term because, I mean, I say grunge to most people and they can recognize it as Nirvana or Pearl Jam or Ripped Flannel or Doc Martens,
Hmm.
or like it evokes a certain culture of the 90s, sort of Lollapalooza type era culture. And yeah, it's but I mean, on a purely definitional level, it's like a mix between, sort of uh punk rock and more classic rock styling, but like or alternative rock stylings. But it's with uh it's one of those things, when you hear it, like using the drop D tuning in the music, or you know sort of, the music tended to focus on dour subjects, not
Hmm.
always, but because there was some humor in the community as well. But um yeah, I mean, it's kind of I mean, the key band, the key four bands are obviously Nirvana and Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains and Soundgarden. and obviously less prominent bands like Mudhoney and Tad and things of that nature. So and what in the book I tried to cover like the big four plus the people, all the bands in their orbit. So it wasn't just about Nirvana or Pearl Jam or Alice in Chains.
Well, what I loved about the book as well was the fact that it did open up some other bands to me, because you mentioned the big four, and they were obviously the ones over here that we were listening to all the time.
Right.
But we didn't really maybe have the Screaming Trees or Mudhoney and bands like that. And I think, when you listen to someone like Kurt Cobain speak or being interviewed, he will always mention someone like Mudhoney. So what do you think was the kind of turning point from bands that were, in that part of the world coming out with great music at the time, but didn't quite get the success until all of a sudden the explosion in 1991?
Right. I mean, there were some. I mean, originally Mudhoney was seen as the band. They were also on Sub Pop, the label with Nirvana. They were originally seen as the band that was going to break out, not Nirvana. Nirvana were like kind of the baby band, but obviously we know what happened. But so there were different expectations in the scene about who would break out commercially. And yeah, it was what was the original question again?
Sorry, no, it's just I just have that idea of like, what was it about that, maybe Nirvana, they were the band that exploded?
Right. I mean, I think it was there are a lot of things about Nirvana. I mean, obviously, you had a charismatic and kind of mysterious frontman. You had, I mean, that I think we can both agree that Nevermind is a classic album. I mean, some people might say it's a little overused, and I prefer In Utero or Bleach, but I mean, still, that was just a classic album that came at the kind of exact right time as hair metal was on the wane. Even though there's a big myth that grunge killed hair metal, but it was already kind of pretty remarkably going downhill by that point. And some of the bigger bands like Def Leppard and Poison and Bon Jovi, they kind of survived for a while. They made their way through it. Some of the lesser bands like the weaker dinosaurs, I guess, died off. So but yeah, right time, right person, right face, right mood for the 90s. Obviously I've been. Are you Gen X? I don't know if you're Gen X.
Well, I'm 41. Is that Gen X?
I'm not sure.
You're
probably a millennial, but so you might be on the cusp. I'm not sure.
Maybe, yeah.
But anyway, that sort of it obviously. I mean, if you look back to the coverage that time, it was really intertwined with Gen X and or supposed slackerdom and all these things. And but yeah, it was. I mean, I think it was just like there had already been bands like Jane's Addiction and Faith No More, and who had kind of like, and even Alice in Chains had kind of a hit before Nirvana did, and they sort of opened the door that Nirvana ended up just like kicking down. But there was all sorts of like alternative music that was kind of bubbling into the mainstream, but Nirvana really just like went all out and kind of conquered the mainstream. So
they're when I think of the big four, in under the same banner of grunge, they don't really sound alike, any of them. That's the kind of strange thing. Now, I'm sure if you picked out certain songs from each, you could make a case for saying this sounds a little
for
bit,
sure.
but in the big scheme of it, they don't sound alike at all.
Yeah, I mean, they were definitely. I mean, there's clearly some overlap. All those bands overlap in some way, but I mean, Soundgarden with Chris Cornell singing, and sort of more. I mean, they hated the comparison, but more Black Sabbathy riffs, and obviously Nirvana stands out to its own. Pearl Jam is, I've always thought of them as more of like a classic rock band,
Yeah.
that was kind of masquerading as a modern rock band. And obviously Alice in Chains are really from the metal side. I mean, all the bands have elements of metal, but Alice in Chains was like genuine metal, I think.
Yeah, like Man in a Box, something like that. It seems so out of place when when you're speaking of grunge and that. But when you were writing the book and you were obviously speaking to a lot of people and you acknowledge a lot of people helped you along the way and stuff.
Yeah.
This is kind of I'm just stealing this idea from you. So whatever your answer is, I'm just going to take it and go with it. But how do you approach interviewing somebody, especially somebody maybe that you do admire?
I mean, I approach it like, I mean, with the grunge book, I had a narrative to tell, and as time went on, I knew more of the sort of things I had to fill in, so I knew what to ask. I mean, amazing toward the end, like I mean, I interviewed some 250 people with this book, and they're like all floating around in your head, and you're like, oh, I remember when somebody said that. So you have to be kind of quick on your feet and know when to ask, like when somebody brings up something about is sort of in the oral history uh format, it's all people in their own words, so you want to get people hopefully describing the same scene perhaps differently. Obviously everyone has their own take and their own memory 20 plus years later, so yeah, and just approach it, I don't know, I guess, with a great interest and like trying to find out, like, I mean, grunge has been written about so much.
Mm-hmm.
My idea with the book was always to like tell new stories, tell stories that hadn't been told before. I mean, you have to tell some Nirvana stories and the ones we've all heard. So, but mix in like the story of Mudhoney, the story of Tad, the story of Candlebox, which was a band who were actually from Seattle but very maligned because they came later and they were seen as like jumping on the bandwagon.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but keeping it's a lot to keep in your head. And kind of you have to do a lot of reading of transcripts and like figure out exactly, especially if they're harder to reach person, you only have the one opportunity. I mean, there were plenty of people I talked to multiple times,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes you only get one bite at the apple, so
You take it. I think
you take it.
yeah. I've listened to I listen to a lot of podcasts about music in general, but your
Hmm.
book seems to be held up now as the definitive grunge Bible, which is quite a weight to hold. Quite a because I was listening to a podcast about the Singles soundtrack.
Right.
If people don't know, Singles was a movie from the early 90s, and um they were mentioned you a number of times because they were going back into conversations in your book. And then I was listening to another one about Soundgarden, and they mentioned you as well. So it was just one of
Oh,
those things
okay.
that, yeah, you kept kind of coming up, and obviously I'd read your book. But like, do you, for something like Singles, because I think Singles is one of those ones, film and soundtrack really, but both of them um, seem to be held up as like, this was what grunge was exactly like. And I find it fascinating when I watch the film, it's different than listening to the soundtrack, because when I listen to the soundtrack, I hear the Smashing Pumpkins on there and Paul
Right.
Westerberg is on there, I think. Um, can Smashing Pumpkins be considered kind of in that
I
region of
mean,
grunge?
they definitely were lumped in there. I wouldn't
Mhm.
consider them a grunge band, but they were peers and contemporaries. I mean, obviously, Billy Corgan was involved with Courtney Love, who obviously involved with Kurt, and sort of a little bit of a love triangle there.
Yeah.
I don't know. And I mean, most of the grunge people seem to despise the Smashing Pumpkins because of Billy
Yeah.
Corgan's personality. He is a very difficult person. But I wanted to interview him for my book, but that never came about. But yeah, I mean, I think there was a certain competition. I mean, obviously, the Smashing Pumpkins came out with some like epic double albums and things like that, and just like over the top. I think it was a certain competition between him and Kurt, Billy Corgan and Kurt. So I mean, I think it fits time wise at least, and kind of it makes sense to me more so than maybe Paul Westerberg, but
I don't see Paul Westerberg as a grunge figure, but the Smashing Pumpkins is interesting because when they reissued the single soundtrack, I think it was a 25-year anniversary, Billy Corgan didn't allow Drown to be on it.
I know. That's a real shame. I mean, on Spotify they have the obviously expansive song really requires the full I don't know how long it is, 10 minutes. It's pretty long, but 8 minutes. But well, Billy Corgan can be difficult. So this was just an example of, I think he was sore that they hadn't released it as a single, if I recall correctly.
You're right,
there were other Screaming Trees and other things that came off that soundtrack that were sold as singles before Drown.
And maybe there's a reason for that, in the sense that even Cameron Crowe didn't believe that it didn't sell the film well enough, something like Drown, because it didn't have the sound that he was looking for. I'm not sure, but that's only a little conspiracy, obviously. But someone like the Screaming Trees, or even State of Love and Trust, and that kind of stuff would be more fitting to the the release of the film and the album. Why did you want to be a journalist in the first place, Mark?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, go back to high school, and I was at first I wanted to be like a computer programmer, but because I liked computers a lot. But that was not actually a good fit for me, I don't think. Not being mathematically inclined. So I started taking journalism courses in high school, and then in college I was on the school paper, and then as soon as I got out of school I went into journalism field. So I've been just like on that track for a long time now. So I like telling people stories. I like hearing people's stories. I like relaying them in a way that other people can understand. I like profiling people. I mean, some of it is music. I mean, that was early on. I really wanted to be a music journalist, and I did accomplish that to a certain degree because I was an editor at Blender magazine, which I don't know if you're familiar, but it was kind of an American competitor to Rolling Stone, a little bit more cheeky, as you would say, I guess. And that I was there for 2 years before it folded. So I did some music in my time. I still do occasional music. I mean, I just wrote for the New York Times. I wrote a profile of Thurston Moore because he has a memoir out now. So I'll do some music, but I think it's mostly a younger person's game, and I've moved on to my last full-time job until it also folded was at BuzzFeed News doing tech editing. So anything to do with tech or culture. I like music, film, literature, things like that. But that can be covered from sometimes where they intersect with technology, sometimes where they're just on their own, like a Thurston Moore profile, just a straight up music profile.
That was interesting to me because I started looking back on your work after obviously reading the book, and when you agreed to come on, and there was my own expectations being wrong, as they usually, well, not usually are.
What was your expectation?
Well, no, it was just that it was just going to be music journalism, and that what was great.
No.
That idea that it was, obviously you do profiles like you say, but there's a lot more to it that you talk about and that you're interested in, and it just kind of crosses with my interests, I guess. Like films and books and that, and it's just it was great for me to be able to dip back into that and see. Even I think there was a piece where you were involved with Shane McGowan, for instance. That was one, wasn't it?
Yeah, I interviewed Shane. I guess it was probably 2 years ago now.
I think
it's all a little vague now. But yeah, I interviewed him about his art book that he came out with. So that was quite something. He's he's pretty ornery, as you know,
Yeah.
and he was gracious enough to talk to me on Zoom. He had never done like a video
Oh,
interview
really?
before, so yeah. He's not really into technology, so yeah.
I can
So
imagine. Like,
obviously, I was here in New York, and he was in Dublin, I believe. Or is he in Dublin? Is he in Dublin? You
yeah,
would
he
know.
is. He lives in as far as I'm
Yeah.
aware, he still lives in a hotel here in Dublin. He's lived there for years, but he might have
Oh,
moved out of the hotel. But
no, I think he's in Dublin. Yeah.
yeah,
I
so
just,
it was he is something of a legend over here, obviously, Shane
of
McGowan, and
course.
I got to see him live a long time ago, like it was around 2000 or something, and he wasn't with the Pogues, and he was with the Popes, and it's
Right.
a very rowdy concert. He was a little bit late, but he came and he sang his songs, and but he's one of those people that we admire a lot over here. And what I find very interesting, I read a great article, and I'm sorry to the writer. She's Canadian, and she wrote a great
Okay.
article about how you come to Dublin and you would not know U2 come from Dublin. Being one of the biggest bands in the world, you would expect some sort of a monument, a statue, some sort of
Hmm.
The Irish have a real problem with U2. I don't. I really like U2.
Okay.
And obviously not all Irish. But I don't know why it is, because when we're talking about people like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, who are not just loved worldwide, but particularly from where they're from, there seems to be kind of a lot of love and a lot of pride. Same as the Beatles in Liverpool, there's statues and everything.
Right.
In U2, or in Dublin, and in Ireland, U2 are almost like ridiculed a lot. And I don't know if it's just Bono, but how do you feel about
Mm.
U2? Because you mentioned them earlier on.
I love you too. I they were like one of my, they were my favorite band. And my first concert was on the Joshua Tree tour, and I
Oh,
saw them on the 2017 Joshua Tree tour where they did it again, and they were quite great. But I kind of lost, uh, somewhere a couple of albums after Rattle and Hum. I
mhm.
lost interest in them. I mean, they're more contemporary stuff I'm not really into, but it's definitely, I find it comfort music. I could see why people have difficulty with Bono.
Yeah.
He he is an outspoken individual,
Hmm.
but yeah. I'm surprised. Yeah, I don't know. You know, I guess he has. And I don't know. He can be a bit difficult at times. Not difficult, but he can be
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
everyone knows him.
I don't think you even need to
He's
say
not
it.
difficult
No, no, not you're right. He's not difficult, and I think I did a whole episode about this a long time ago
about Bono.
about Bono and Conor McGregor, and kind of the idea that how we revere. Well, I don't, but people revere Conor McGregor over here. They think he's great, and they'll
Uh-huh.
have a go at Bono. And I mean, the difference between those two men when it regards to a lot of things in life, I would hold Bono up a lot higher in a lot of the way he looks at the world and the way he speaks,
Right, right.
and like his movements towards what he's done for the world and Africa in particular, when he was talking about the trying to get to cancel the debt, that kind of stuff is very noble, and I don't quite get it. I'm with you on the music. After kind of probably Octum Baby, it started to
Maybe,
drift,
yeah.
and that's all right. Like, not every band keeps writing great music as they're getting older, but I just find it fascinating that you know, that it's not only the Irish, because I know there's some people in parts of the world that don't like him either for his outspokenness and stuff, and
Yes,
that
he's easy to mock, I guess. I mean,
yeah,
I've always wanted, like, on my list of like top interviewees, he's like up there somewhere. I
yeah,
mean, he's like super articulate and poetic, and like, I mean, there's some things that baffle me about him, like him being friends with George W. Bush, and
mm,
like just some things that are just don't compute for me
yeah,
really. But I guess, being in those orbits of power, you tend to, you know, glom onto other people in your tax bracket, I guess. But
yeah.
yeah, never made sense to me, especially given all the U2 stands throughout the
Mm.
years. But yeah, well, you should erect a monument to Bono in the town square and see what happens.
Maybe I will. It'll probably be a waste of money. It'll probably be egged or someone will do something
Probably.
to it. But what I would say about people like Bono and Eddie Vedder can be thrown into this kind of mix. The longevity of their careers and how they've,
Right.
stuck around so long and have been outspoken about things. And kind of the sad thing when we're talking about Eddie Vedder, he's the last one of the big four grunge bands that's
Yeah.
left, which is a sad thing to say considering the age they would have been if they were still here.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously to review for the obviously everyone knows that Kurt Cobain is no
Mm-hmm.
longer with us, and then obviously Chris, maybe 6 years ago
Yeah.
we lost him, and obviously Lane Staley as well. So all to a mix of either drugs and or suicide. So yeah. I mean, in my book, in talking to Chris Cornell, he kind of said, like, you know of the bands, obviously fame can be quite crushing. And of the bands, he thought that Pearl Jam did it right, because Pearl Jam, when they became super popular in the early 90s, they pulled back. They stopped making videos for MTV. They stopped doing public
Mm-hmm.
appearances. They stopped releasing singles. He's like, that made a lot more, Chris Cornell said that made a lot more sense to me, like, than Nirvana coming out with In Utero and
Yeah.
then touring, and like, they were just doing too much. Like, Pearl Jam kind of went into a defensive crouch, and I think that paid off, because they still exist. They're still
Mm-hmm.
around. They're the only of those four bands that I mean, uh obviously Alice in Chains exists with a
Yeah.
new singer, but in its original, more or less original format.
Yeah. What I think about Pearl Jam is they still, you're going to go to a Pearl Jam gig and you're going to get the greatest hits. And I think there's something very comforting in that. Like you said about U2 being a kind of comfort band for
Right.
you when you were younger. And I think that's what appeals to the fans. Now, and this is kind of goes back to what we were talking about a second ago. So I didn't listen to Smashing Pumpkins a lot when I was younger. So my brother listened to him quite a bit. He was a bit more into Bon Jovi and that kind of stuff. Not
Uh-huh.
not for me, not for me. But a friend of mine invited me to a Smashing Pumpkins gig next year in June. And so I was kind of like, I said yes. So there's a group of them, and I'm in a group with them now, and in a WhatsApp group, and they're so like into Smashing Pumpkins. It's all about Smashing Pumpkins, and I
Really?
actually do like some of their songs. Obviously, Drown is a brilliant song. Mayonnaise, those kind of songs I really like. But I acknowledge that Billy Corgan's a bit of a dick. Like really, like when we put
He
it down to
is.
it. So
He
I don't
seems
want
like
to.
an unpleasant person, but
He
yeah.
does, but I don't want to put that in the group. But they did bring it up there recently about him being a bit of a dick. So I felt a bit better that I could kind of jump in there and kind of voice my opinion on it, even though I'm going to go, and it's going to be, I'd imagine, a greatest hit set by Smashing Pumpkins. And I think it's a co-headline with Weezer or something like that,
Oh, is it?
which
Okay.
is a very strange duo, I think. Do you not think?
I mean, at least they're in the right era, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you're
Yeah,
right, actually. You're right.
I think I think it fits in its own strange way. Maybe it doesn't make the most sense, but I
Yeah.
think those bands you know, although Weezer probably have a little bit more of a sense of humor, obviously, than
Yeah.
Billy Corgan. Yeah, not known for his sense of humor.
No, no, for a sense of humor, really, Corgan. But I do like those things that are happening now. Those nostalgia moments. Now, this was a few years ago. I went to see Peter Gabriel with Crowded House, and again, I was thinking that's a strange get together. But then it's not really because, like you said, the era thing is huge as well. It's not just the
Right.
genre.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, two people from the more or less who are performing at the same time, I
Yeah,
guess makes sense. I mean, I don't know. I guess that's not like the most logical bill, but I'm sure
it was good.
there's quite a bit of overlap between those two.
Um,
The fans of those bands.
yeah. I mean, it was very good. Obviously, I mean, I would say the Crowded House. This was an outdoor gig. I would say they're the best sounding band. If you, when you're talking about technical you know,
Oh, really?
by the way it's arranged on stage. I thought they were amazing. And Peter Gabriel, I've seen it 3 times, and I think he's great. But you know, but can we play? Can we play a bit of a game here, Mark? And this is it's
Game, sure.
well,
What
yeah.
kind of game?
Why not? I mean, why
Just
not?
like one of those jigsaw puzzles
Yeah,
from
I was just
Saw
gonna say
movie.
it's like so. Yeah, I maybe should have phrased it better. But so what I wanted to do, so I'm going to name some grunge bands. Okay,
Hmm.
I'd say grunge in inverted commas, and I just want you on the top of your head your favorite song by that band. All right,
Okay.
is that all right?
Okay.
Okay, I'll give you mine then. But I've had time to think about it, so it's not really
You
fair.
have,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go with the obvious one, Nirvana.
I like Negative Creep Lot from
Oh
Bleach.
wow,
That's a great song. That's one that I never get tired of.
that's a great shout.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that.
Probably no, no, no. Okay.
It's a
What
great
about
call.
you?
Serve the servants.
Okay, that's a
I,
good one too.
yeah, I love it. I don't know why that much. I think the lyrics are pretty cool. I think there's a history within the lyrics, which I obviously didn't know when I first heard it. But then when I went back into it, I was like, some of that is kind of what was it? What the teenage angst has paid off well. Now I'm bored and old. That's just a
Yeah,
great
great
line.
opening line for,
Yeah,
especially given where Nirvana were in that
yeah.
at
And
that
he
juncture in their career for
and he was
sure.
about 25 when he was writing it. So bored and old. I must be very old. So Mudhoney.
Mudhoney. I mean, I'm gonna have to go with "Touch Me, I'm Sick." I mean, it is the ultimate. It's like the ultimate grunge
Yeah,
song. You know,
that is
pretty much
the
encapsulates grunge in its snarly essence
yeah.
there. And I think I mean I would have to say that I do like. I mean that the title of my book comes from this song called Oberblin, which was on the single soundtrack. I like that song a lot too.
It's great.
The "Everybody Loves Our Town" lyric is in that song. So um yeah, I would say, but I would have to say, I mean it's almost cliche, but "Touch Me, I'm
Well,
Sick."
sometimes they're cliche for a reason,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they're really good. I have "Sweet Young Thing" Ain't Sweet No More, um, but "Touch Me I'm Sick" would have been around there. Soundgarden.
Soundgarden, "Slaves and Bulldozers." I
Oh,
really like yeah, I really like that album in particular. And yeah, I don't know, something kind of completely epic about that song.
that's the
Uh,
kind of the Black Sabbath. If people were to mention it, it's kind of what I would
yeah, yeah.
pick as the sound. I had Outshined. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I just think the vocal well, the vocals in his and their songs are always absolutely brilliant anyway. But just that particular, I
Right.
couldn't put Seasons in there, even though it's a Chris Cornell song, but it's not a Soundgarden song. But Seasons is just
No.
beautiful. It's a beauty.
Yeah.
So Pearl Jam.
Pearl Jam. I'm trying to think. I'm not like the world's biggest
Hmm.
Pearl Jam fan.
Me neither, actually.
Uh so, but I do like. I'm just trying to think.
I'm going to name
Just
mine
trying to think.
while you're having a think.
Okay, well,
Mine
you
mine is
name yours.
Dissident.
Oh, okay.
I
Um,
I don't know.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, we were going back to like the hit that, oh, as I said, that when Pearl Jam pulled back,
Hmm.
they have this stirring epic Black from the first album, which is a fantastic, beautiful song, but like, they didn't want to release it as a single. They had too much fame too quickly. So I really like that song a lot. I mean, um, there are probably some other ones. I'm
Hmm.
trying to remember. I mean, yeah, I'll stick with Black for now.
Yeah, I like the idea, and that probably would have catapulted them to even further success. And when you watch the MTV Unplugged version of Black,
Uh-huh.
that's such an impassioned like performance, and his Star was on the rise. Anyways, their star was on the rise, obviously, but Eddie Vedder seemed to have it all as a frontman, kind of. He had a great voice. He was good looking. He had the
Right.
long, shiny hair. He had it. He had everything. So he was lucky in that sense. But Black is great. I mean, that whole album is great. I will move on. I'm not a big fan. No, sorry. I'm not. It's not that I'm not a big fan of the Screaming Trees. I don't know a lot of the work, but I'm going to throw them out there anyway.
Screaming Trees. I mean, and this is another cliche answer. I mean, I think, and I know that, would not have been the band's top pick because it was their biggest hit. It was nearly last year.
Yeah.
What I mean, there's something undeniable about that song.
Yeah.
Something that could be, where it was like played during interstitials for football games, American football games. And, I just think it's, I had done an oral history of that song for Spin a number of years ago. So, yeah. Again, another band where, I mean, Mark Lanigan no longer with us, Van Conner no longer with us. So, it's another sort of void and void in the 21st century grunge landscape, I suppose.
It's very sad how there are so many that have gone. I nearly lost you, but again, I can't dig deep into the Screaming Trees back catalogue. So I put Temple of the Dog in there because they are a grunge supergroup, really.
Right. Yeah. I mean, maybe Say Hello to Heaven.
Yeah, that was my one actually. Yeah.
But yeah.
They've only got one album. It's difficult to.
Yeah.
I suppose everybody will say Hunger Strike. Yeah, which is great. But I think Say Hello to Heaven again, more to do with the vocal, I think, than anything else. Right. Even though when you hear Eddie Vedder and Chris Cornell kind of doing a duet, it's pretty good.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah. Yeah. They're pretty well suited for each other.
Yeah. It's great. It's a great album. It is a great album. Yeah. Another band with one album, Mad Season. Would you have them in the grunge era? Just around?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, maybe River of Deceit or something like that. I feel like I'm naming all the most common ones, but
no, but again, that's one album
for a reason.
Yeah, it's for I had Wake Up, but River of Deceit is it was of those two again. I'm going to say Stone Temple Pilots because you didn't mention them earlier. No, you didn't mention. Sorry, Stone Temple Pilots. Would you have them in there?
In grunge, but I mean, originally, I had reached out to bands like Stone Temple Pilots and Bush, and sort of those bands that were seen as Johnny Come Latelys or jumping on the bandwagon, and they didn't want to do it. I took the one member of Bush, but Silverchair didn't want to do it. So it ultimately became very much more like Candlebox did, and it made sense because they were a band. They were actually from they were from Seattle, even though there were rumors that they were from LA because they were like too slick or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was the question?
Stone Temple Pilots. I had
Stone Temple Pilots.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a huge Stone Temple Pilots fan. I was never really into them. I mean, I had to I did face the biases because I grew up during that era. They were always seen as kind of like, I mean, Interstate Love Song is an undeniable song, and they do have some really great stuff, but I always saw them as kind of wannabes, whether that's fair or not. I mean, I think ultimately they kind of proved themselves to be a real band, but I think I was, back then there was a lot of talk of who's selling out, who's who's compromising their values, and which we don't talk about anymore today, but back then we did.
You mentioned about the hair metal earlier on. Actually, I do have one more band, but I'll go back to it in a second. You mentioned about the hair metal band earlier on, bands earlier on, and they seem to sing about sex a lot. Sex and money and being, whatever. the grunge bands brought in the idea of to sing about maybe depression and mental health and
Yeah,
drug taking
and
as a norm.
yeah, I mean there definitely some darker lyrical content there, but there was some sex stuff there in there too. I mean, you listen to Mudhoney or um you know uh Sweet No Young Thing Ain't Sweet No More or something like
Yeah,
that. There's a lot, there's kind of like a darker sordid side of sex in some of those grunge songs. But yeah, I mean I guess in a general way that they tended to cover more difficult terrain
yeah.
or just in a way that was obscure enough that weren't quite sure what they were singing about.
Yeah, like when I was listening to a podcast recently, and they were talking about like the idea of Kurt Cobain's lyrics being slightly underrated because people who didn't like Nirvana thought he just shouted and didn't really make any sense, but
Uh,
also the idea of someone like Lane Staley, and I know he wrote some of the lyrics and just sang some of the lyrics, but he was explicitly singing sometimes about taking drugs and how he was lost
oh
in a kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
drug phase.
especially
Yeah,
toward the end there. Yeah.
it's at the time, I suppose people, well, naive people, I suppose, still were celebrating that kind of thing of, taking drugs is cool and all that because I want to be in a rock band. But when you look back on it now at all the people lost, not only through drugs, but, some of them have been lost through drugs, it's kind of depressing and sad in itself that you wonder if this is a call for help or whether this was just like an artistic thing they were using, so a trope they were using. I often wonder about like, were these calls for help or were they just
Oh,
put out there?
lyrically, I mean,
Yeah,
with
yeah. With Lane
Alice in
Staley,
Chains.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think Lane Staley was. I mean, it was clear from speaking with those around him that he was at a certain point beyond help. He was just
yeah,
holed up in his apartment doing drugs and barely saw the light of day. And I mean, he was, as you probably know, he was dead for a few weeks before
yeah,
anyone actually found his body. So he was pretty isolated there. I mean, it was a full on lifestyle. It wasn't
mm,
like there was no dabbling going on.
no,
I mean, Dirt is one of that era. Is like just an intensely brutal album, and I love the album. And I mean, it's too bad that it was had to it presaged everything that happened to them. With,
yeah,
the drugs and the way they basically imploded
yeah.
eventually.
It is very sad. Let me just wrap up this little silly little game that I devised.
Yes.
The Smashing Pumpkins, I put them in there. I know not technically grunge, but we're going to put them in there anyway.
um, I mean, I do love Drown, but
Mm,
only the
edit.
unedited version.
Oh, the unedited
Uh,
version,
unedited version,
the
not
10
the
minutes.
edited version. Yeah, you got to have the whole thing.
It's a long
Um,
track.
it is a long track, but I'm willing to go on that journey with
Okay.
Billy Corgan. But I'm a big fan of Gish, their
Mm,
first album. Uh, I mean, I think it's just like the perfect album, and they were like so great back then. And so it was before they got kind of. I mean, they were probably pompous, but before they got too pompous and bloated, and it's just a fantastic guitar album and
yeah.
just amazing stuff on there. So that would be my favorite album. But Drown is certainly a classic song. I
Yeah.
mean, uh,
I actually wouldn't have
yeah.
Drown. I'd have Cheru Brock because
Oh, that's a good one.
yeah, oh yeah, I love the beginning of it. Now I know that it's a kind of a copy of a song by New. Can't remember the name of the song, but if you listen to the start of this song by New,
Uh-huh.
it's the same. Jing, jing,
Oh,
jing,
is
jing,
it?
jing, jing. Yeah, it's the same. But there's nothing wrong with that. But just funnily enough, he never mentioned that Billy Corgan. But if it happened the other way
Oh, really?
around, I guess he might have mentioned it. But I have to So this is because I know you love your music, obviously, and your films. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and I don't want you to sidestep them. I want you to go in there and just because some
Oh,
people are
wow. Okay.
worried about like they don't want to misrepresent themselves about certain. Like I named this band as my favorite, but it was really this band. I just didn't think of them at the time. Who's the best band of all time?
Oh, best band of all time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's changed over the years. At a certain point, I was like a huge Slater Kinney fan. I think that has decreased um, in recent years. You know, what their output is uh, less to my liking, I guess.
Okay.
A little more polished, I suppose. But they were at one point. I mean, as I said, Prince was at one
Hmm.
point. U2 was, at a much younger point. Spiritualized, I love. I'm going to see them
Okay.
next month in Manhattan somewhere, and love Spiritualized, and
Yeah. They're
get to see
from
them
near
anytime
us.
I can. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah. I mean, there are a lot of bands, but those are kind of some of the ones that come immediately to mind.
That's perfect. So you know what's sidestepping here. I like it. So
I'm
what's
trying not to sidestep, yeah, until it gets until the questioning gets awkward, but we'll
no,
see.
it won't. It won't. It won't.
Okay.
Uh, what is the greatest film? I know I say film. I'm aware of that with my accent, but what is the greatest film of all time?
Greatest film of all
Mm.
time? You mean my favorite or the
Yeah,
greatest? I
like
mean,
I know that's kind of because it's easy to say Citizen Kane, but say your favorite.
yes, it isn't Citizen Kane, but
Okay.
my favorite film. I mean, one of my favorite films is um, Dazed and Confused.
Mm.
Just like love the capturing of the era in there, and so many people who went on to be stars. There's a really good
Yeah.
oral history book about Dazed and Confused called All Right, All Right, All Right,
All right.
which I quite enjoyed. Yeah, I just love that it was sort of this incubator of talent. I really like Richard Linklater.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah.
I love more recently, I love Midsummer. That
Brilliant.
was yeah, seen that quite a few times. Probably it's Halloween time. Probably see it. Maybe I should see it one more time before Halloween. But yeah, so those are just a couple
They're
that come
good.
to mind.
I love watching horror films in October. I kind of make it my thing because I really do like horror films, but I don't watch them all year round, maybe because they don't come out. But I watched two this morning, and they couldn't have been more on the good to bad scale as
What were
possible.
they?
So the good one I thought was Barbarian. Have you seen that?
Oh yes, yeah.
I
I
I
like that
actually really
movie.
liked it.
Yeah, it was. I don't want to give anything away to the
No.
to the viewers, but they should go in as without
Mhm.
knowing anything about it, I think.
I actually
Uh
I got away with that somehow without any spoilers as well. I didn't know
yeah.
what it was about, and I think yeah, look, without saying too much more, I think it's one of those, if you did know, maybe you lose an awful lot of the actual tension around it. The other one was the Boogeyman, which was just terrible. Um,
I don't think I've seen that. Is that
it's
an older movie? 80s movie?
no, it just
90s?
came out. It came out this year. It's obviously based on a Stephen King short, um,
Ah.
and it's
Mhm.
like there's not much you can give away. I mean, it's about the boogeyman, but just there's no how none of the lights work in the house. It's one of those ones where you're like,
Uh
she's walking on a hospital corridor at one point, and it's practically dark, and I'm thinking, what hospital is practically dark? It's just irritated me an awful lot, I think. Maybe, do you know, it might have been the fact that all my muscles are very sore and I'm just kind of irritable in one of those moods after yesterday. It might have been that, but I did really like Barbarian, but something like Midsommar is a great example of not just a really good horror film, but a good film, well put together and acted
oh
and
yeah,
all
yeah,
that. I
for
do.
sure.
I
For
love that
sure.
about it. Um, just touch on this towards the end here, Mark, because we always ask this question again. What do you like to do in your spare time, if you have any?
I do have spare time.
Good.
I do. I mean, I'm a hopeless Twitter addict. I know that's not like, I mean, I'm trying to wean myself off of it because of how awful it's become over the past year, but
Yeah.
I'm constantly on Twitter. People, if they want to follow me, they should follow me at Mark Yarm.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to diversify a little bit. But Yeah, I mean, I live in Brooklyn. I like to enjoy. Yesterday
Mm.
was 80 Fahrenheit out, which was quite nice, but now it's turning into the cold winter months. So I do like
Yep.
to get outdoors and do some hiking and things like that, although I haven't been in a while. What else do I like to do? I'm a big consumer of uh I mean, it's kind of like my job. My job is journalism, but I'm
Yeah,
a big
of
consumer of journalism and long
course.
form journalism. And I co-write uh, a it's called Long Lead Depth Perception. It is a newsletter about long reads
Oh,
and different nonfiction uh, articles and documentaries and films
where's
and
that
things like that.
available? Just online?
Yeah, yeah. Just Google. It's a Substack. It's
Okay,
long lead LEAD depth perception. You should be
excellent.
able to find it by
Yeah,
Googling it. So I've been doing that for a few months now. But yeah, so I mean, basically a lot of it overlaps with, I love journalism and I love storytelling and I love reading. I just picked up I interviewed David Grant, who did the Killers of the Flower Moon book. I just picked up
yeah.
he has a collection of profiles of people that I just picked up. So I'm looking forward to that. He's like the master at this stuff. So yeah, so that sort of thing keeps me
Excellent.
relatively busy.
I must say
How
that
about,
his book, Killers of the Flower Moon, the book, I haven't seen the film yet. It's a long film. I don't know if I'll get to the
it
cinema for it, but
is
the book is exceptional. And when I read the book, I think it was one of those ones, Mark. You know, when you hear a film's being made, but it's based on this book, and then you go, well, I'll read the book
right.
first because I don't, and I thought it was sensational, and I hope the film doesn't let me down. Basically,
I mean, by all counts, I haven't seen it yet. I'm hoping to see it this week, but by all counts, but or most accounts,
yeah. Well,
98% of accounts,
yeah.
it is
I
great. So
it's look, it's Scorsese, and I heard an interview with Thelma Schoonmaker, who's, if people don't know, is the editor of his films, and her work is, I wouldn't say it's underrated, but outside of the film people, it probably is going
right, right.
in the editing. But her work on his films is just astounding.
Yeah, yeah, she is definitely. I mean, I feel like people within the film world know of her and
They
her
recognize the
her
talent there.
skills, but
Yeah,
yeah, but maybe the average everyday person doesn't. But yeah,
yeah,
I
you're right.
think film nerds certainly do.
Yeah, but listen, Mark, you've been a fantastic guest. I really appreciate you taking the time out to chat with us.
Well, appreciate it, and I guess that was some music. Do you do that?
What I'll
Like,
do is I was just going into that, Mark. Don't worry. You're in
oh,
good hands.
sorry, I
Listen,
stepped on your line.
no, you didn't. No, but you're in good hands, all right. So what we'll do is I'll just close this out. Hang around. We'll close it out, and I'll take a picture. I take a picture of the screen. I've got a collection of them at
Oh,
this
sure.
stage, so we'll just take a picture of the
Okay.
screen. So thanks very much for that, Mark. I also have to say thanks to John for all his tech support. I always thank my mum and dad, my granddad, Jerry Calvin. Rolls off the tongue. Subscribe to us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X. Go and subscribe to
X,
Mark
yeah.
and X. More importantly, X.
Yes, yes. In
Yes.
these dying days of Twitter, please give me a little boost.
Give him one more boost before it's all over.
Yeah.
We're also on Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google Podcasts, and some others. But most importantly, thanks everyone else for tuning in today, for watching. Apologies for the sun coming in through the window. It
It's
was
okay. I think
radioactive.
it's great. I mean, we're overcast here in Brooklyn, so
You're
at
doing
least
all
one of
right.
us is enjoying sun.
Yeah, well, that's true. Look, I'll take it. But once again, Mark, thank you so much.
Thank you, Derek. Take care.
And everyone else, thanks a lot. Bye.